I don't usually go out of my way to introduce myself to new neighbors. I've lived in my subdivision for 10 years, and I've only formally met one of the 4 families that have moved into houses on my street. The other houses are occupied by families and single owners who have lived there for as long as I have. There is an unspoken agreement to leave each other alone. We all, for reasons that assuredly vary, greatly value our privacy. When the Kernstocks moved in across the street, I was, as usual, avoidant. I didn't go out and greet them during their day-long rental truck unload. I did not make myself seen on my lawn or in my garage while they rested on and in theirs. I did not offer assistance when the father struggled to unload a large couch, while the mother and child carried in smaller boxes. I had nothing against these people, key tents being had, but I also had no incentive to help them. I respect the rule of the neighborhood. I depend on it. People around here leave each other alone. The day of their arrival passed without incident, that is, without interaction. I successfully made myself scarce when necessary, and they never ventured across the street to introduce themselves. Likewise, the other homes throughout the neighborhood remained shut and quiet, as if they were unoccupied. The Kernstocks, whose name I learned by a novelty sign affixed to their mailbox, seemed, from a distance, like normal, nice people. But you should never judge a book by its cover, or a child by its feigned innocence. I went to sleep that first night thinking that the Kernstocks would do well in the neighborhood. When I awoke the next morning to find their child standing on my front porch, I immediately reevaluated that thought. I had gone out to grab yesterday's mail, which I had temporarily forsaken so as to avoid being seen, and upon opening my door, I came to find a 4'8" human being standing barefoot on my welcome mat. I did not know why I owned a welcome mat. The child was dressed in nightwear befitting someone his age, pajamas bearing designs of some video game or cartoon character. His hair attested to the appearance of having just woken up, the brown locks matted on one side of his head, and wildly sticking out from the other. But the child's eyes belied this false appearance. They were eerily aware, alight with a vitality which was plainly beyond childish excitement, wonder, or even long-awaited mischief. They were the eyes of a focused, sophisticated mind on the verge of enacting some sinister plot. I was immediately, uncomfortably sure of this fact, as silly as it may seem. I greeted the child with a voice that, looking back, probably sounded meek, if not actually frightened. I had never felt so spontaneously disconcerted, and the fact that the child had somehow elicited the feeling made it even worse. The kid looked up at me and pointed, a stubby little finger aiming past my head and into my house. I half turned, cocking my head in the direction but keeping my eyes on him, not wanting to completely remove him from my sight. I asked him what he was pointing at, and rather than smile and say something creepy like I would come to expect in that bizarre moment, he instead said, "That is your territory," and then pointing back at his house, continued, "And this is mine. You have your secrets, we have ours. We can coexist peacefully if we stay out of each other's way. Do you understand?" There was no sly smile to indicate that he had been joking, no cuteness about his demeanor. He was in that terribly tense moment, completely serious. I nodded, incapable of mustering up the air necessary for speech. The child nodded, and ambled back toward his house. I watched him enter the street, heedless of potential traffic, then shut the door, not bothering to retrieve my mail. Any joy that would have been possible for that morning was stripped away by the encounter with the Kernstock boy. I stayed inside, though not because I wanted to. The neighborhood was quiet and antisocial, but we all had lives, jobs, and hobbies, things which frequently took us away from our homes. I had wanted to go to the bookstore for a volume of manga and a cookie at the cafe, but instead I stayed inside and mostly just stared, or ascended and descended the stairs without any real reason. I looked out a window once, peered through the vertical curtain slit of the window in my bedroom. In that brief glimpse of the outside world, I saw something bizarre, nearly beyond belief. The Kernstock boy, sometime during the hours since our unsettling encounter, had grown, had advanced in age by several years, becoming a young man in his mid-teens. There was no doubt that this was the same child who had only hours ago essentially told me to stay away from him and his family. His hair was the same, and I had seen no other child during the previous day's move. But even if I didn't notice the hair, or had doubts about the total number of occupants of the home, I would have nonetheless known right away that this was the same person, because the eyes, those eerily animate eyes, snapped at me during my brief peek through the curtains. I quickly withdrew from the window and ran into the master bathroom like a dog who had just been scared by a suddenly activated vacuum. I literally panicked, had a full-blown episode of anxiety and terror, all because of that kid, that teen that had looked at me from across the street. I stayed in the bathroom for a few minutes until my breathing calmed down and my heart steadied. I hadn't bothered to turn the light on, knew that seeing my pathetically frightened state in the mirror would only worsen things. Eventually, after regaining enough composure to at least pretend that I was a rational, mature adult, I left the bathroom and went downstairs to make some coffee. Thankfully, I had rarely depended on the stairs railing for ascending and descending the steps during my 10-year occupancy of the house. Halfway down, a belated realization caused me to misstep and nearly fall forward, but my hand instinctively grabbed the railing, and it supported my body weight without giving. Hanging there, desperately clutching the railing as if there was a pit of acid below me and not a tiled floor. I replayed the brief image of my glimpse through the curtains in my mind, and shuddered at the recollection, was unprecedentedly unsettled by the horrible suggestions. I realized then that I was not dealing with some evil child who, unbeknownst to his parents, could change his form and do other wickedly preternatural things. It wasn't until I had gone to the stairs that my brain registered the other person in the short glimpse. The child, the hastily grown teen, had been helping his father carry in groceries. His parents were aware of his exponential growth. And despite these surreal circumstances, there was nothing that I could actually do. Nothing I wanted to do regarding the miracle kid. Like with most things that are, compared to our regular lives, amazing or even terrifying, it eventually lost its flair as the hours went by and the priorities of my own life had reintroduced themselves. I went about my day, consciously focusing on chores and hobbies, while subconsciously burying the unexplainable observation beneath the usual mound of mundane fears, insecurities, worries, and song lyrics. The next day, Saturday, I was allowed a pleasant morning, a satisfying lunch, and the beginnings of a comfy afternoon, before my life was threatened by you-know-who. I had made the mistake of answering my door before looking through my peephole. I rarely had the need to use the aperture, since even the delivery man of insert service knew not to bother without knocking, knew that I, along with everyone else in the neighborhood, preferred to have packages and foods left on the porch, Payment pre-made through an app, a website, or a phone call. When I opened the door, I came to find a familiar face, though one that was thankfully not the result of accelerated aging. It was the father, Mr. Kernstock, who smiled at me warmly upon making eye contact. He asked me if I wouldn't mind taking a picture of him and his family standing in front of their new house. Somewhat dumbfounded by the boldness of this man, boldness compared to the reclusiveness of everyone else, I delayed in responding, and he took this as acquiescence to his request. He gently placed a camera in my hands, which I must have automatically, stupidly raised, and told me how neither of his immediate neighbors had answered their doors. I smiled and tried to refrain from crushing his dinky little camera. I followed Mr. Kernstock across the street, and it didn't occur to me that I had made a horrible, life-threatening mistake until he came outside, along with his mother. The teen had of course aged again, though the unnatural leap through the years had not been as excessive. He had aged 2 or 3 years, rather than 6 or 7. Now a young man of 16 or 17, his eyes, cryptically vibrant, seemed a bit more appropriate for his body. But even the unrepentantly mischievous, often cruel eyes of a suburban teen typically held within their core some spark of innocence, some capacity for redemption through maturation. These eyes were totally, balefully wicked, carried within their gaze an expression of conjugating evil. And when they rested on me, standing on the sidewalk with the camera in my hands, I remembered the boy's words. We can coexist peacefully if we stay out of each other's way. Do you understand? The father gathered his wife and son by his side at the edge of the lawn, instructed them to smile, and then nodded for me to take the picture. I aimed the camera, repositioned myself, and adjusted the camera's focus for the optimal shot, and then took the picture. But the father did not retrieve the camera, was not given the opportunity to approach me first. The son reached out and took the camera from my hands without even introducing himself to me. As far as I knew, his parents had been unaware of his earlier visit. Before turning to walk away, he whispered, I told you to stay away from us, and now you've involved yourselves in our lives. He returned to his lawn, handing the camera to his father as he passed by. Mr. Kernstock examined the photo and complimented me on my amateur photography skills. I was just about to turn and leave when the son paused midway through his front lawn, turned back to me and said, No, by the way, now that you captured me on film, I'll have to restart this whole thing. I can usually make it to adulthood, but a picture is evidence, and well, I can't have mom and dad catching on too early. It spoils the fun. The son, that unnaturally developed freak, snapped his fingers and his mother's skull exploded. Skull fragments and bits of brain scattered like shrapnel, and her limp body fell sideways onto the driveway. I froze, immediately rendered immobile by the shock of the unforeseen violence. Mr. Kernstock continued to admire the picture, even though pieces of his wife's scalp had landed on his shoulder. I managed to stammer out something unintelligible, which got his attention, but he only waved a hand and reaffirmed his opinion that it was a really great photo. The son formed a finger gun with his hands, aimed it at his father, and pulled the pretend trigger. Mr. Kernstock's chest exploded, showering the driveway with red, and he fell to the ground, still gripping the camera, his face still frozen in an expression of satisfaction. Doubly traumatized, I glanced around, but knew that even if someone had been watching, they wouldn't come to my assistance, wouldn't dare leave their homes. With a power that was undeniably supernatural, the son lifted the parents and drew them into the home, by means of some sort of effortless telekinesis. The bodily debris were left on the lawn and driveway, a grisly reminder of his atrocious feats. And then, in another show of his appalling power, he de-aged himself back to the state he had been in when he had first appeared on my front porch. Before returning to his home, he picked up a piece of flesh and flicked it at me. A sickeningly wet shred struck my face and stuck, but I was helplessly petrified. The piece wasn't removed. The son, the boy, laughed in a perfectly normal, innocently childish way, and then snapped his fingers once more. This final feat threw me into darkness, a state of instant and deep sleep. When I awoke, it was a new day. I had slept roughly 16 hours. I unsteadily got out of bed, hoping that the last couple of days, or at least the previous day, had been a terribly vivid nightmare. But when I went to the bathroom to relieve my bladder, my reflection in the mirror banished all hopeful thoughts from my mind and sent a boreal chill through my body. Stuck to my left cheek was a piece of dried human flesh.